Today I'm sharing a really special Christmas recipe, a beautiful old-fashioned fruit cake from the Schauer Cookery Book. The earliest edition was published in 1928 and this recipe has stayed the same ever since, so it's almost 100 years old. And as such, it's got so much fruit compared to flour that the fruit naturally settles as it bakes, especially in a very tall cake. And this is exactly how old-fashioned Christmas cakes were meant to be. And I've had 2 pieces and I'm really trying to stop myself having a third one. It is so delicious. It's rich and it's moist and it's just packed with fruit. And it's one of those cakes that actually improve with age. It's a beautiful old recipe and I'm really excited to share it with you today and to keep it alive. And this is how I do it. So I'm using a square tin today and that measures 23 centimetres in diameter and 7 centimetres depth. Now if you can get it slightly higher, even better. And if you want to use a round tin, the recipe actually says that, a round tin, but I really like the way a square cake cuts. It cuts into beautiful slices. This one's actually got a removable base. And I'm just going to trace. Just think of this as a little craft project. Because the cake bakes for so long, it's really important that it's lined properly. And what that does is it ensures that the cake gets cooked in the middle and doesn't brown too much around the outside. And the recipe says brown paper, and what I have here is just some brown paper bags that I had in the cupboard. So I want to put 2 sheets of brown paper on the bottom and around the sides, and 1 sheet of baking paper which will go on top of the brown paper. Maybe this is a little high, so I'm just going to trim it a little bit. And it doesn't matter if you fold the baking paper, it will just give it extra protection anyhow. So it just stays in place. I'll just put a tiny little bit of butter between the papers just to make them stick together. There you go, something like that. Because the recipe's so old, it's all written in pounds. But on the website, I'll leave this original recipe with the pound measurements, but for today, I've converted it to grams, because that's what we now use in Australia anyhow. So into a bowl, put 570 grams of plain flour. Now gluten-free flour works perfectly fine here without any add-ins. Because there's so many eggs and fruit in this cake, it doesn't rely on the gluten at all to hold. And because it cooks so slowly, it just works. And the only rising agent in here is 1 teaspoon of bicarb soda. And the recipe says to sift this twice. So the second time I sift it will be into this massive bowl here. And now for the dried fruit. There is 1.8 kilos of fruit in this recipe, which includes a few blanched almonds. So it's like a 3-to-1 fruit to flour ratio. And I've stuck mainly to what the recipe says. However, I have bought boxes of raisins and currants, and these are a little different to what the recipe says. The recipe says, for instance, 450 grams of raisins, and this box is 375 grams. So what I did was I worked out the difference and just put more sultanas in. So in the recipe on the website, I'll have both. I'll have what I used and the slight difference with what the recipe says. However, we've got the same amount of fruit in total. So you want all the fruit basically the same size as a sultana. And this is a packet of raisins, which is 375 grams. And what the recipe says is to cut each raisin in half. So you can just group them a little bit at a time or just chop them like so. And when they're basically chopped quite small, they're done. The other dried fruit that has to be chopped is some glacé cherries. And this is 150 grams. Now these are really sticky, and the recipe even says to wash them, dry them, and then cut them into quarters. Dry them on a clean cloth and then just cut them into quarters. Glacé cherries by themselves don't taste fantastic, but I found a way where they taste really good. I made a banana split some time ago now, and it was really good, and I couldn't finish the whole lot, so I put it in the freezer, banana, glaced cherries, ice cream and everything. And oh my goodness, when glacé cherries are frozen, they become like these chewy lollies. They're so delicious. True story. And if you get a really big one or two, cut them into eighths, or just so they're really small. And there's one other thing I have to chop, and that's 150 grams of blanched almonds. And I'll just use a clean, non-sticky knife to do this. I'll get another board so I can go for it. I was running out of room on that board. But you want everything small, so when you go to cut the fruitcake, it cuts beautifully. Do you know, a food processor would have been much quicker. When I make anything from this book though, I often think, you know, back in those times they didn't have electric beaters, so everything was done by hand. And there's one recipe there that says cream the butter and sugar for 30 minutes. So when the blanched almonds are quite small, they're ready. And now we add all the fruit to the flour. But first of all, I put a half a teaspoon of salt in there. Make sure that salt's evenly distributed. Then I add the raisins and cherries, a whole packet of currants, which is 300 grams, 625 grams of sultanas, a whole 200 gram packet of mixed peel, the almonds, and the recipe says 1 packet of spice, which I worked out to be 1 tablespoon of mixed spice. Did some research, and in the recipe on the website I'll put alternatives if you can't get mixed spice. 1 whole nutmeg, grated, finely grated. Nutmeg is such a lovely warming spice. Now just mix the flour around with the fruit, and seriously the easiest way to do that is with your hands. There's so much fruit in here. And the reason you don't soak the fruit in the brandy is that there's so much fruit that the brandy wouldn't penetrate all that fruit, and if anything it might even dry it out. And because this is such a slow bake, the fruit will become super moist anyway. Now for the wet ingredients. Now you'll need the finely grated zest of 1 lemon and 1 orange, and just the juice of the orange. And when you're up to this stage, it's a good idea now to preheat your oven to 130 degrees conventional, a very slow oven. If you have an oven that only works on fan, 110. So very, very slow. You're best to cook this for slow and a long time than too quick. Now into your largest bowl, put 450 grams of very soft, unsalted butter and 450 grams of light brown sugar, or the recipe says you can use white sugar like caster sugar. But I think I like the light brown sugar the best. And then 2 tablespoons of treacle. Now the recipe says 1 tablespoon of treacle, and the reason I've increased it is that treacle was darker, stickier back in that time. So today it's not as dark, so that's why I'm putting 2 tablespoons of treacle in. And using a stand mixer or a hand mixer, cream this until it's light and fluffy. And when it's light and creamy like that, now what we do is we add 10 eggs, 1 at a time. and room temperature eggs work best. And because I'm using a hand mixer instead of a stand mixer, I'll have to stop every time I add an egg. So instead, I'm just putting them all into a jug. 10 eggs. Now these eggs weigh about 60 grams each, and I figured that was the standard size for a large egg back when the original recipe was written. Eggs have got larger since back then, and the recipe says 10 large eggs. So if you're using a stand mixer, just add them one at a time. But because I'm doing this with a hand mixer, I'll just add a little bit at a time and beat in well between each addition. So the recipe says add 1 small teacup of brandy or rum, but the recipe also says that it may be made without spirits and it will keep perfectly. So this is optional. I'm using brandy today, and that's my small teacup. I measured it already and it's like 180, 200 mils. But use your favourite spirit or no spirit at all, and it will still taste fabulous. And it says to slowly add this while beating. And then in goes the finely grated zest of the orange and the lemon, and the juice of the orange only. And at this stage it'll probably start to look a little bit curdled, but that's okay, because now what goes in is all this fruit and flour. I'll just mix half of it through and then the other half. That is a lot of cake mixture. And those women, probably mainly women, maybe men, back in these times who didn't have an electric mixer, their arms must have had so many muscles on them, because this is a workout. Even just with the hand mixer, it was a little bit of a workout. But now it's ready to go in the pan in the oven. Now I'm going to do my best to put this in so it doesn't get all up the top here. So I'll just start with spoonfuls of the mixture. It's a very loose batter. I love this part of the recipe. It says to stab it to make sure that it's evenly distributed and there's no air pockets. Then get a wet hand and pat the top flat, and this will help it bake evenly. Now to protect it even further, I get a baking tin. I put a few sheets of brown paper, in my case paper bags, in there, and I put this heavy cake on them. Now this will go in the oven for at least 4 hours. I'm going to check it after 2 hours, and if the top is browning too much, I'm going to put a sheet of baking paper on it. And put it in the lower rack or tray of your oven, in that very slow oven, and I'll check on it in 2 hours to see if I need to cover the top. So I might run into an issue. It's gone really dark. There's a thunderstorm about to happen outside, and the fruit cake's only had 2 hours in the oven. It's still got another 2 to 3 hours of baking. But it's been 2 hours and the cake has got a long way to go, but it's starting to show some colour on the top because of the alcohol in it and the treacle. And I'm just going to put a sheet of baking paper over it, just loosely, and that will protect the top from browning too much. And I'll check it at the 4 hour mark, if we've still got power. So it's nearly been 4 hours. The storm blew over, thank goodness. We've been having some crazy storms, so I want to show you this. This was from the last storm we had. These are hailstones. Look how big they are. They fell from the sky, loads of them. So I'm going to check the cake, and if a skewer comes out clean, then I'll remove it from the oven. And in preparation for that, I have some brandy here, or if you put rum in the cake, use rum. And just a tablespoon or maybe 2. It's heavy. So it's been 4 hours. It's beautiful colour. If I stick that in the centre, oh, that's coming out pretty clean. That's ready. So that took 4 hours in my oven. So I take the brandy and brush it over the top of the cake while it's still very warm from the oven. And this, the recipe says, preserves the cake. I'm really happy with the colour. It's got a lovely flat surface, and that should be enough. And now what I do is I get a clean towel and I put it over the fruit cake. And I'll need 2 towels. And I leave it cool in its tin overnight. Just draping it loosely around like that so it can still breathe a little bit. And I'll come back tomorrow and take the paper off. My kitchen smells like Christmas. So it's the next day. Last night before I went to bed, I took it out of the baking dish. Now normally I would leave it another day before I sliced into it, but I have to go to work tomorrow. And besides, I really feel like a piece. Now if you have a tin with no removable base, then I would simply get a board, put it on top, invert it, and then invert it back. But this tin has a removable base. This fruit cake is so heavy. Carefully peel off the paper. Look at that, what a beautiful high fruit cake that is. And it's flat on top, it hasn't sunk in the middle. But what I do now is I leave it to breathe for about 60 minutes before I cut into it. The moment of truth. I've just run my knife under boiling water and just wiped it so it's nice and hot. Now fruit cakes should be cut quite thick. Here goes. And this is still very fresh. Hopefully I can get a nice cut slice. Oh my goodness, look at that. But I'll just slice it into slices. Put this end bit there. So excited. Cup of tea. Look at that. Hand on my heart, this is the best fruit cake that I've ever made, and I've made quite a few. I make the Old Woman's Weekly ones, I make a pineapple fruit cake, but this tastes like my mum used to make. It is so delicious, and if someone gave me that for Christmas, even half of it being gluten-free, I would be absolutely thrilled. Thank you so much for watching. Now the best way to store this is to wrap it in baking paper, then foil, and then a plastic container if it's humid and put it in the fridge, or a tin if it's not humid and it's cold where you live, and just store it in the dark cupboard, and it will last 4 to 6 weeks in the cupboard, and in the fridge it will last the same, and in the freezer it will last up to 6 months. And because it's got all that alcohol in it and the top has been preserved, you don't need to feed this cake. Just enjoy it and eat it. It is so good. I am going to make this for my mum and dad because I know my dad would just absolutely love this, and send it to Melbourne when they come home from their Christmas holiday with my brother. Thank you so much for watching. This is truly a really beautiful cake, and I hope to see you again soon.